Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 20th of March, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling us at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. It's always ready for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you'd like to go online, head to weather.gov/Alaska and click on the page. You'll be taken to your local forecast office in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage, serving your weather needs, whether you're along the coast, out in the marine areas, or over land. And you can also find links to the general aviation forecast from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit or the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Breakup is just around the corner, and you'll want to stay tuned in the next few weeks. We will have more information about that and what your local rivers may be doing. If you can't find what you need anytime you want, send me an email at david.snider@noaa.gov. I love to hear about how things are going in your community and how we can do a better job. I also love to see your pictures and your weather videos there, so send them our way. We'll get them on the Alaska Weather Show sometime. Here's a look at what's going on across the Valdez area tonight. It's really a little difficult to see. It's a small area in a big state, but we're talking about Valdez and Thompson Pass tonight. A high wind warning will start up tomorrow around 10 o'clock in the morning and go until about 6 o'clock on Thursday. We're watching for some strong winds out of the north and northeast coming down through the canyon. And because of that, they may reach speeds of 75 to 85 miles per hour. That's a little bit more wind than what we normally get in Valdez. It gets breezy there, of course. But some of that wind that's normally in Thompson Pass may also go down into Valdez as we get into your Wednesday and Thursday. So be prepared for that. What you don't see is high wind warnings or watches or anything like that across southeast or for the Matanuska Valley or the very western end of Anchorage there. But we are thinking that the winds are going to come up in some of these areas, primarily the Matanuska Valley, and that means Palmer. It's going to get windy, and areas around southeast, especially Stevens Passage up through the Lynn Canal. We're going to get some stronger gusts there as the pressure gradient is tightening up over all these areas. So be prepared for breezy conditions and especially be prepared for high winds around Valdez and Thompson Pass as we go into your Wednesday and early Thursday morning. All this is part of the same weather system that is pushing a lot of warm and wet air northward across the Chukchi coast and through the Bering Strait region. Because of that, we think we're still going to have some pretty strong and maybe nasty winter conditions around St. Lawrence Island, through the Bering Strait and up the Chukchi coast as we get into tomorrow. So winter storm watches have been posted for these regions. The orange areas, we're looking at about 4 to 8 inches of snow. Gusts could come up toward 60, 70 miles per hour in some cases. And because of that, we may reach into blizzard conditions there. That means poor visibility as well. So be prepared for changing weather conditions in the morning around St. Lawrence Island and around the western end of the Seward Peninsula, and then eventually by the evening hours up around the Chukchi coast. Now for Thursday, a winter weather advisory has been posted. Probably not going to see as much snowfall and certainly not as much wind, but visibility may be reduced. And as a result of that, winter weather advisory will go into effect on Thursday around Barrow and maybe just a little bit further inland as well. There's a lot of weather on the north side and on the south side, and in between, what's going on? The weather is changing. Here's a look at the satellite picture today. This big kind of ball of clouds just south of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula is high pressure moving moisture slowly northward, but the big effects are happening out here across the western Bering as a very strong southerly surge is working its way across the North Bering and into the Bering Strait. All of this is going to continue working its way into the Arctic and may even keep going as we look into Thursday and Friday. We can see the effects of these changes now happening around Alaska, actually going up and over the pole and heading into northern Europe. This is a pretty impressive weather system. The other side of that is some of this air will be descending southward. We have a trough of low pressure here across the eastern Gulf, and this is helping to draw more air across southeastern Alaska and over Prince William Sound, through the Matanuska Valley, and even southward into the central Gulf. The results of all this will be increasing wind, not a whole lot of precipitation, and out across the west, warm, wet conditions, snowy conditions, high winds, and again, a change in that sea ice edge. So if you're out across south and western Alaska and you're noticing diminishing sea ice edge and that edge retreating to the north, that's going to continue. If you're on the northern coast across the Yukon Delta, across Nunivak Island, St. Matthews, St. Lawrence Island, those northern coastlines are going to see some more changes as that ice is moving away from your location. Here's a look at today's weather map. Already colder air is working its way down into parts of southeast. We're going to generate an offshore flow across the eastern Gulf. As this wave moves across the interior, spotty snow showers have been found across many locations, and ceilings and visibility are going to stay down at least a little bit for the Alaska range as we go through the first part of tomorrow. Once this passes, things should improve pretty quickly, but then we'll start to worry about the winds out from the west. As you look out to the west today, we see rainfall around Shemya, some areas of fog out there as well. Once we get into tonight, the front will reform. It looks like we're going to be into more of a cold front setup, and on the back side of that means colder air. So areas of light rain will be possible across the chain, and look for those big changes up around Bering Strait and through the northern Yukon coastline. Across parts of southern southeast, periods of rain and snow may still be possible there, but it looks like we will be moving into a drier pattern for many locations. Partly to mostly cloudy skies, the air flows out and over the mountains and then down, and that should keep you into a breezy, perhaps windy, but probably a dry setup for you. You can see some snow showers continuing around the Alaska mountain range there and south and central. Generally dry conditions, but blustery conditions through Prince William Sound. Some of the strongest winds developing around that Valdez and Thompson Pass area. This is also a good weather setup for wind across the Matanuska Valley. So if Wednesday and Thursday are trash days for you, you might want to put a rock or something on top of the trash bin, something to keep your lawn furniture if you've got it out already, or that maybe the camper top on top of your truck from flying away. We know that happened the last time we got into a big wind situation. Out across the west, periods of snow and snow mixed with rain should be expected as warmer air continues traveling northward. And once again, winter storm watches have been posted for the Chukchi Coast all the way through the Bering Strait region as a result of the wind and the potential snow and poor visibility. You'll notice the northern coast hasn't gotten into any snow just yet for Wednesday, but as we get into Thursday, that begins to change. And once we get into your Thursday, we'll probably see poor visibility around Barrow and a strengthening wind across the Beaufort Seacoast. So watch for more updates on the weather situation there, as things will be changing as we get toward the end of the week. Low pressure has now dropped to about 966 millibars across the northern Bering. That's a pretty stout little weather system across the northern Bering. And because of the big winds that are working through the region, remember that ice edge is also going to be pushed northward and away from north-facing coastlines. This is hunting season for many communities, so make sure you're keeping close watch on what the sea ice conditions are doing and check in frequently with your weather source to make sure that you've got the very best and latest weather forecast so that you and your community can continue to stay safe. Look for rain showers south of the Pribilofs. That'll include places like Sand Point all the way out toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. A strengthening westerly wind, which you'll see on our marine forecast here in just a bit, should also include some snow showers as we get toward the end of the week for places like Atka, Adak, all the way out toward Kiska and Attu. Once again, southeast really not dealing with a tremendous amount of precipitation. There may be a little bit of rain or rain mixed with snow across some of our southern communities there, but by and large, it's going to be a wind situation for most areas. It certainly will be breezy, and it looks like with the tight pressure gradient here, Stevens Passage and certainly Lynn Canal will be dealing with some strong and gusty conditions as we go into Thursday and probably into Friday, with some improvement, though, in the weather around the Valdez region. And it looks like we'll still be dealing with a tight pressure gradient around the Matanuska Valley. So that, too, could continue the wind for the Palmer region, perhaps watching around Big Lake and areas into the Cook Inlet area as well. For most of the interior, passing clouds, some fair weather. You may have another chance at the aurora before we get a little bit more into the sunnier season of summer there. So some good news there if you get a chance. Let's take a look at temperatures now. It's still going to be cold. Up across the North Slope, we're looking at low temperatures into the morning, anywhere from about 5 below to 20 below around Barrow and Wainwright. Kaktovik about 10 below. The Kotzebue Sound region 5 to 15 below. Norton Sound, you're looking at single-digit temps. Bristol Bay, anywhere from the teens and 20s, 38 around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, 35 in St. Paul, 20s and 30s for southeast, south central teens and 20s as well. High temperatures tomorrow will be mitigated by the wind. So if we get a big surge of wind, Temperatures could go way up, way fast. Look for temps tomorrow, though. We expect in the lower to mid 30s for South Central, 38 in Kodiak, and low to mid 40s for most in Southeast. For the Middle Tanana Valley, high temperatures probably in the lower to mid 20s. For the North Slope, you're still in the cold, anywhere from 5 to 10 below around Barrow out toward AKwx, down toward Point Hope and Point Lay. And teens and 20s for the Kotzebue Sound region. Shishmaref about 26, 28 in Nome, 32 around Gamble and Savunga, and low to mid 30s for many across the Yukon Kuskokwim coastline into Bristol Bay. Easy for me to say. King Salmon and Dillingham just above freezing, 39 around St. Paul and St. George, and 40s from Sandpoint westward all the way through the Aleutians area until you get to Shemya, and that's about 36. Overnight low temperatures now for Thursday morning, looking like 20s and 30s for most of the Panhandle. Prince William Sound anywhere in the teens to about 30 degrees up around Valdez. Teens for most of the Cook Inlet communities, 28 around Kodiak Island. Northward up the Parks Highway, we cool off toward Talkeetna and up toward Denali, anywhere from 0 to about 5 below. 3 above, though, it looks like around the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks. North Pole, anywhere from 3 to 4 below around Eagle and Northway, 6 below in Fort Yukon. Ambler and Bettles, either side is 0, pretty close to that. Most areas around the North Slope, 5 to 10 below. Kotzebue Sound, teens and 20s for you. Kotzebue about 13 degrees. As we get out toward St. Lawrence Island, once again in the upper 20s. So the southwestern coast, teens, 20s for the Yukon Delta, though 24 around Nunivak Island and Macoriac. Looks like 20s and 30s for most of the southwest coast, including Unalaska, closer to 40 degrees, in fact, by Thursday morning. And you won't see much of a change there for Thursday afternoon. For southeast, look for temps in the upper 30s to low 40s again. Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, all in the lower to mid 40s, in fact. Prince William Sound in the mid to upper 30s. South Central warming up a little bit more for your Thursday afternoon, up to 40 in Kodiak. Bristol Bay just above freezing. Once you get into the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, Unalakleet, places like that in the upper 20s, 29 in Nome, mid to upper 20s for the Kotzebue Sound region, and 30 in Shish.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. IFR conditions will spread from west to east as the next wave of warmth and wet air move across the Bering Sea. You can see some of that hitting the western slopes of the Alaska Range and pushing northward into the middle Yukon Valley. And the upper Tanana Valley, the eastern Alaska Range, still has some residual moisture lingering there. As we get into Wednesday afternoon, a lot of what you'll see across the west will break apart, but the main surge of that IFR will start moving its way toward the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, all the way down to the Pribilofs, and the extreme western ends of the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta out toward Nunivak Island. And really, most of the chain will be under IFR conditions through most of the day. You'll have breaks and probably okay conditions by the afternoon for many parts of Bristol Bay, at least in the interior end, all the way through Lake Iliamna. And then across the central and eastern Alaska Range, northward through the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley, watch for IFR and lingering MVFR around the Chilkoot and White Pass area, as well as some parts in the central boundary ranges there. So that's Wednesday afternoon. As we get into Thursday, look for IFR to return to the middle and upper Yukon Valley and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range in the east. And IFR spreads into the Chukchi Coast, as well as parts of the Kotzebue Sound region, the YK Delta, all the way down to the central and eastern chain once again. Pretty good conditions, ceiling and visibility included for the Gulf of Alaska, including South Central, Kodiak Island, and really most of Southeast. You'll start to see some changes again as we get into Thursday afternoon, mainly along the boundary ranges there up toward Chilkoot and White Pass as well. The eastern Alaska Range, including Mentasta Pass, and up around the Chukchi Seacoast. And IFR conditions are back for St. Lawrence Island all the way through Nunivak Island and the Alaska Peninsula all the way up toward Sandpoint and points northward, almost to Chignik there. Let's take a look at your pass conditions and in detail. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, as we saw, will start out with MVFR, but improving conditions are expected to go through the day, so look for VFR conditions in Adigan Pass by the end of Wednesday afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we're expecting IFR through most of the morning, but look for some improvements during the daytime. You'll get another decent day again on Thursday. Rainy Pass, IFR conditions there, VFR expected by the afternoon with improvement conditions there. We probably won't see as much of a change in windy. You'll start and end there at MVFR conditions. Same goes for Isabel Pass through the Parks Highway system there, looking for marginal conditions if you're flying up through Broad Pass. Mentasta Pass, looking for IFR to start, MVFR through the afternoon. Tonita Pass, we expect to see a better start in the morning than in the afternoon, so marginal conditions developing there. Portage right now looks to be VFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass expected to lean over toward marginal conditions through the afternoon. Here's a look at the freezing levels, and as we were just talking about, that warm and wet air is surging northward. We were showing that on our surface charts, and you'll see the reason why here when we look at the jet stream in just a moment. But the 2,000 and 4,000 foot freezing levels are north of St. Matthew Island, heading toward St. Lawrence Island, and here's the 6,000 foot freezing level just south of the central chain. Surface freezing line hugging the Gulf Coast for the most part, right over Kodiak Island, Resurrection Bay, Prince William Sound, and out towards Sitka and points southward. Most of the mainland, though, will start out below freezing, as you would expect. But look at the moisture, and you can see that with that southerly flow, it is increasing the risk for icing, but a lot of that's going to be pretty high up there, anywhere from about 9 to about 10,000 feet across the central chain, and right around the central and eastern chains, still even higher. For areas in southeast and mainly along the boundary ranges there, if you're flying through Chilkoot and White Pass, you'll see levels maybe as low as 4,000 to 5,000 feet, and icing potential exists out over the Gulf as well. Here's the jet stream, and no wonder we're getting so much warmth and wet air. That strong southerly flow is pushing a great surge of heat northward, and we're going to see this actually travel up toward the North Pole, and some models are actually taking this ridge, breaking this off, and sending it up over the North Pole by the end of the week. So a pretty strong southerly surge in order to do that. Low pressure sitting across the Gulf of Alaska tomorrow, and with that, a deep northerly flow, though, coming off the continent. This could increase some wind threats for some areas around Prince William Sound. We'll keep watch on that. A strong onshore flow for maybe the southern half of southeast, but generally this looks like kind of a drier flow for you, at least in the short term. Here's a look at the 9,000 foot winds. Southerlies across most of the Bering Sea. Wind speeds anywhere from 40 to 60 knots. Low pressure sitting south and west of Haida Gwaii. You can see that offshore flow for southeast. And winds picking up around the Alaska range, 20 to 30 knots. Here the ridge is still holding for most of the Yukon Valley, so light winds there at 3,000 feet. But that deep southerly flow is certainly going strong across the Bering, and we have our offshore flow going across southeast with winds across the Beaufort Seacoast up to 10 to as high as 25 knots. So turbulence is going to be watched around the Bering Strait below 4,000 feet. Most of the chain looking at levels below 4,000 feet, some moderate chop there, and isolated severe around Prince William Sound. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Cindy Preller. She is the Tsunami Program Manager for the National Weather Service in Alaska region. Thanks for joining us again, Cindy.
Thank you, Dave.
We're talking about tsunami awareness and safety here in Alaska especially, and one of the things that has been one of your main focuses is the Tsunami Ready program. What is that, and how do Alaskans find out more?
Awesome. Yeah, Tsunami Ready is a National Weather Service hosted program in partnership with Storm Ready.
Okay.
And it is a program that we conduct with our partners in the state, but it's mostly community driven. So if a community wants to become tsunami ready, well, the first thing they need to do is get a hold of me or their local WCM at a weather forecast office or their tsunami team at the state level.
So, and this is something that's a NOAA grant, so there's money available to help encourage the preparedness at the local level there in the city or the village.
Yeah.
What are some of the places that have done this already?
Oh, our oldest tsunami ready city is Seward,
Good.
you know, but also Sitka, Homer, Valdez are the, the main players, but we've got several tsunami ready communities that I'm very proud of. It takes several years to accomplish this. And so a few of the things that they do is the tsunami risk will be assessed by someone like me or another scientist will help find out, really what their probability is. We'll create an inundation map, an evacuation map. They'll have a mitigation plan. We will set up some partnerships with the schools, make an evacuation shelter, and then they need to practice. But it is the city that owns the program, really. It's up to them. And many cities would like to have sirens, and so we help them get those. And, and they practice. They have to practice.
Sure. So let's say I'm driving into a place like Seward that's tsunami ready. What are some of the things I should look for as maybe a visitor so I know maybe where I need to go or can be more aware of my tsunami risk?
Absolutely. The tsunami ready signage is really blatant. It's this, blue and white curling wave sign, and there's different shapes of signs that'll show you if you are in the hazard zone or where the evacuation routes are and when you're out of shelter.
Okay. So this is a multi-step process that helps the residents be more aware of their own risk, but then also prepare for when that risk arrives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, many communities sound their sirens daily. Some sound them weekly, you know, to make sure everybody knows what they mean. And there's often drills. We have an annual drill once a year. We have Tsunami Awareness Preparedness Week, and that's a good time for each community to do some exercising.
Okay. And is this a program that is unique to Alaska?
Absolutely not. It's national.
Okay.
And all over the country, you'll have the same signage, so it's consistent.
Good. So if I'm taking the kids to California, I should be able to see something familiar.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And you know, some communities hesitate because they think it'll discourage tourism. And so I would like to tell those communities that what they're actually doing is they're encouraging responsibility.
Sure.
The tsunami's going to happen.
Right.
And it's going to hit every coastline. So, you know, it's not about when, it'll be any time. So the fact that they're showing tourists that they are making steps to be prepared for this, I think would encourage people to want to stay there.
Right, and that would be no different than, say, you or I visiting the Midwest, where we know there's going to be really bad thunderstorms and maybe there's a risk for tornadoes. We're aware of that risk when we go there.
Absolutely. If I see a sign for a tornado shelter, I'm going to remember that.
Right, okay, all right. So we're just doing a better job of being more prepared with something that's bound to happen again.
I hope so.
Okay, very good. Where can people go again to learn more about the Tsunami Ready program here in Alaska?
Well, one, there is a Tsunami Ready website. So, you know, just Tsunami Ready, and that'll get you there. And then probably the best person for people to contact is their warning coordination meteorologist at their local weather forecast office, which is Anchorage or Juneau, most likely.
Okay, all right. So most of the folks along the Bering Sea coast, again, are not at a huge risk for tsunamis.
No, they don't need to worry about it.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. But always learning to be prepared no matter where you are in Alaska, no matter what the risk, always a good step. And tsunami is a major player in that, as we well know from events like 1964. Okay.
Alaskans are resilient. I really believe in them.
Very good, very good. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us again, and please make an effort to learn more about the Tsunami Ready program in your village and town if you haven't already. We'll be back with Cindy again next time to talk more about the Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska. We actually have a group of geologists working for the National Weather Service, so scratch your head on that one and we'll join you next time. I'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Packs.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice forecast, and as you'll notice across the Norton Sound region and the north coast especially of the Yukon Delta, north of Nunivak Island and also north of St. Lawrence Island, we're getting some push already thanks to that developing south wind. That's only going to strengthen as we get through the next couple days, so watch for more changes where we start to see more marginal ice zones developing around those north-facing coastlines. This is updated as of the 20th, and you can see the thicker concentrations, the greater concentrations above 80%, and the very narrow band of blue, those are concentrations less than 80%. And we see a lot more of that in Cook Inlet really than anywhere else. We'll likely see the edge eroding and shifting northward across some of our more southern coastlines, including outside of Bristol Bay all the way up toward Nunivak Island, and perhaps out towards St. Lawrence Island as some of the warmest areas moving northward. Here's a look at the windy forecast now across southeast. Remember, we were talking about that really tight pressure gradient. We're going to see the effects of that starting to ramp up as we get into Wednesday. Notice the northerly gusts through Stevens Passage, gusts up to 40 knots here, 35 knots sustained across the Lynn Canal, so not too terrible just yet, but watch for those winds to come up. For the Clarence Strait, northerlies up to 15 knots, and the outer coast winds not too bad south of Sitka, but you can already see that wind coming up out of Cape Yakataga, out of the north and east, anywhere from 30 to 35 knots across the north and eastern part of the Gulf. And then here comes the winds, sustained winds up towards pushing gales there. 40 knots, 12-foot seas expected with strengthening northerlies across the inside passages, 35 to 45 knots sustained, and gusts in Stevens Passage, including the Juneau area, up to 50 knots. So we're going to have some stronger winds as we continue to go through the week, and you can see the channel of higher winds and higher seas there out across the central and eastern Gulf. For south central, the winds will be strongest probably around Valdez and the Narrows. Inside of Prince William Sound, north and northwesterly winds 30 to 35. Looking at winds coming out of Resurrection Bay up to 40 knots with 10-foot seas there. Cook Inlet developing northerlies will be strengthening Wednesday and Thursday, 25 to 30 knots. Seas up to 10 feet west of the Barren Islands. As we get into Thursday, 20 to 30 knots continue there out of the north-northwest. Across the Barrens, 30 knots. Northerlies around Prince William Sound pushing out over the Hitchinbrook entrance region, still holding onto about 6-foot seas there. The strongest winds and seas will be shifting to the south and the east. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, 30 to 35 knots over Kodiak. Light winds inside of Bristol Bay, 3-foot seas there, 5-foot seas down the coast, more of a south and westerly flow curving in to that strengthening southerly flow, 15 to 20 knots for Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, you can see that much stronger west and southwesterly push developing. Looks like most areas in Bristol Bay and the Bering Sea coast, 20 to 30 knots there, 4 to 5-foot seas. Northerlies across Kodiak Island, 25 to 30 knots there, and kind of variable winds across the North Pacific, rounding that ridge of high pressure. Northerlies closer to Kodiak and southerlies from Perryville and Sandpoint and westward, 25 knots with an 8-foot sea. For the Aleutians, south and easterly flow pretty steady, 25 to 30 knots there, 7 to 8-foot seas across the Bering. You're looking at 7 to 12-foot seas across the central and eastern chain, and a developing, strengthening southerly flow there. There is a cold front working right through Kiska as we go through Wednesday, so watch as that becomes more of a westerly flow as we get into Thursday. Strengthening west and southwesterly flow for the central and eastern chain, 30 to 40 knots, 11 to 17-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, and 13 to 17-foot seas across the Pacific. Look for stronger winds across the western coast to develop for Wednesday, anywhere from 25 to 35 knots in general, 20 knots from the south and east over the ice in Norton Sound, about 25 to 35 knots for St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George, anywhere from about 19 feet for the seas there around St. Matthew, 10-foot seas around the Pribilofs. You'll notice that strengthening to strong gales, perhaps even storm-force winds around St. Matthew as we get into Thursday. South and easterlies also strong up towards St. Lawrence Island, 25 to as strong as 55 knots with seas 17 to 26 feet. And for the Beaufort Sea coast, 10 to 15 knots there over the ice. A southeasterly flow strengthening for the Chukchi coast up to 35 knots on Wednesday. As we get into your Thursday, you'll see 40 to 50 knots across the Bering Strait communities and north of St. Lawrence Island, strengthening easterlies for the Beaufort Sea coast, 20 to 30 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, a high wind warning goes into effect for early tomorrow morning around Valdez. Look for strengthening winds across the inside passage for southeast and around the Matanuska Valley. Winter storm watches for St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait communities up through the Chukchi coast. That will start tomorrow morning and work their way up the coast through the day. As we get into your Thursday, plan on a winter weather advisory around the Barrow community. We could see winter storm warnings to blizzard warnings perhaps across the west as a 966 millibar low works its way toward the Bering Strait and really strengthens that southerly wind while keeping many in south central and southeast a little bit on the breezy to windy side through the rest of the week. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.